let's talk about how to get booked on podcasts. It's really important to understand that landing podcast guest appearances is an excellent way to market your podcast and speak directly to new listeners in your target audience. And guest podcast interviews often benefit brands, businesses, or experts in a particular field trying to boost their credibility, right? So it's a win-win-win-win-win-win for everybody. Now, there is an art to getting booked as a guest and being the type of guest other podcasters want to have back in the future. So in today's conversation, I want to explain to you everything you need to have, all the hacks, all the tips, all the tricks you need to keep in mind if you want to get booked on podcast. Now, here are the steps I want you to pay attention to. The first method is to reach out to podcasters. Yeah, very simple. Reach out to them, ask questions. The good news is that a lot of podcasters are looking for podcast guests and make themselves pretty easy to contact. So basically, if you want to contact them, first of all, you want to make a podcast wish list. So make a list of podcasts of roughly 30 to 40 shows that you feel are the right podcasts for your expertise. And if you are a podcaster, look for shows that share similar podcast listeners as your own audience, so they'll be more likely to subscribe to your show, right? Because it's not just about you going there to share your expertise. You also have to think about the return for yourself, the return on investment for yourself. For example, having new subscribers, more downloads, and other stuff. So you can find relevant podcasts to pitch to in several ways. You can go to Apple Podcasts, for example, tap the name of your podcast in the search bar and click on your show. Scroll down to you might also like to find the top shows related to your podcast. Browse the podcast listed in this section and take special note of podcasts with guest interviews. Then you can also think about listen notes. So for a deeper dive into a more niche podcast, go to listen notes and enter your podcast's subcategory. You can use the drop down filter menu to narrow the results. You can think about Podchaser. Here you can search potential podcasts in Podchaser to make sure the host has featured guests in the past. If they have, you can reach out via the platform as long as you have a Podchaser account. You can also try Reddit. There are a lot of podcasters on Reddit, and providing valuable comments to their posts can be a great way to get noticed for an interview. And you also have Facebook groups. So you have a large constellation of ways to actually seek the right opportunities. Podcasting Facebook groups can be a great networking resource, and some are even dedicated to finding podcast guest opportunities. Just be sure to read the rules of each group before you join. By the way, boss, welcome back to the show. It's really a pleasure to have you here. We're going to have a wonderful conversation today, and we are going to talk about how to get booked on podcasts. So step number 1, make a podcast wish list. Step number 2, you want to find the contact info. So it's important to understand that you need to find the show host contact information for the shows on your wish list, right? Fortunately, nearly every podcast host is online in some way. You can typically find the host's name on their Apple Podcast or Spotify page, or in the introduction or one of their episodes. Once you have their name, you can typically find them on social media where you can reach out directly. And I want to insist on the fact that you want to reach out directly. And when you reach out, please be polite, be professional. Even if the host is has a friendly allure, has a friendly persona on air, has a friendly persona online, when you reach out to them privately, be professional. Okay, because sometimes we have some clients who get it twisted. They think, well, the host is very laid back. Publicly, it just means I can reach out to them in a very laid back way too. No. This is a business relationship. So it's first and foremost a business relationship. Now, if you're able to build a rapport with that podcast host, then this business relationship, you can parlay that relationship into a personal relationship. Okay, so once you get the host name, there are a lot of ways you can get some information. So go to the website contact form, email, typically available on their website or YouTube channel. You have the podcast Facebook page, personal Facebook profile, Instagram, Twitter, and now it's called X, LinkedIn, Patreon page. So you have a lot of ways to reach out to the host. But again, you want to draft a very polite, professional email that talks about your willingness to be a guest on their show. Nothing else. You're not trying to really You're not trying to really like flatter them or whatever. No. You're not trying to compliment them. No. You're just trying to ask a very simple question and make it as professional as possible. Now, if you are a podcast host yourself, this could be even better because that means that you can also invite them to your show. So this could be a win-win situation for both you and the one that you're reaching out to. So again, the bottom line here is that you want to be as professional as possible, and do not ask the same host twice, only once. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We're having a conversation about how to get booked on podcasts. Step number 3, you want to craft your pitch. See, the whole thing is that I think that's what I spoke about when I said be professional, right? It takes a little forethought to craft an effective podcast pitch, but you typically get what you put into your pitch emails. So try to spend some time here making it the best it can be. Every solid pitch consists of 4 distinct parts. I want you to remember this quartet, 4 distinct parts. Okay. So first of all, you have the subject line, then you have the context, then you have the pitch, and then you have the section where you are trying to overcome objections. Let me break it down for you. First of all, the subject line. You want to make the subject line concise and to the point. It should summarize the topic of the email in a short, brief phrase. Try to keep it under 60 characters and less than 10 words. So here are some do's and don'ts. So like basically you want to put podcast guest inquiry. That's a great title. You can put the proposed topic, and you can say you can say the name of the host, James Doe, podcast guest inquiry. I would love to connect. And don't put on the subject line. Don't put things like podcast host looking to be featured as a guest on your show, or I have an idea about something you could interview me about. Don't put that. Okay. So and number 2, the context. The first few lines of your email or message need to convince the podcast host that you have something to offer. Here are some questions you can answer to establish a more meaningful connection and keep them from hitting delete. How do you know about them? Have you listened to their podcast? And what do you like about them or their podcast? And let's talk about number 3, the pitch. Once you establish some context, you can go for the ask. Make the ask succinct and clear, and be sure to frame it in a way that makes it clear how your appearance will bring value to the host and their podcast. For example, you can say something like, I've noticed that you haven't done an episode talking about this, blah, blah, blah yet. I'm an expert on this and talk about it frequently on my podcast, blah, 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 blah. I would love to share my knowledge and experience with your podcast audience and dive into, you can put 3 or 4 things you are qualified to talk about relating to the topic. It's also a great idea to link to mention your qualifications and link to relevant content where you have discussed this topic before. This could include blog articles, social media, blurbs, other podcast episodes, video interviews, and so on and so forth. Now, you also have to overcome objections. Even if you nail the first 2 or 3 parts of your pitch, there is a great chance that your podcast host will have at least one objection come to their mind. Here are 3 common objections and how to handle each. You can say something like, it will be difficult to find a good time. So you can say you want to be accommodating of the host's schedule. If they only got an opening every other Tuesday evening, make it happen. The more available you are, the better, right? And they can say, I'm not sure you'll be a strong guest. Send the host a link to an episode of your podcast or an article where you talk about the topic so they can hear what you bring to the table. If you already landed a few guest interviews, send them links to those as well. And what's in it for me? Make it clear how your appearance will benefit the host, right? You can tell them that you will promote your guest appearance on your podcast, to your email list, and all of your social media platforms. The second method. So the first method is to reach out to podcasters. The second method is to use a third-party platform. So instead of doing things yourself, you want to outsource the whole task to a third-party platform. Now, podcast guest placement services are like matchmaker services to connect podcasters and guests. So here are 3 excellent podcast matching services to consider. So you have Podmatch, you have Podchaser Connect, And then you have the third one is podcastguest.com. So let's quickly go through each of them. So basically, first of all, Podmatch, this actually will charge you about $29 per month. So they charge you. And so Podmatch uses AI to automatically match ideal podcast guests with podcast hosts to produce high quality interviews. So once you create your guest or host account and set up your profile, Podmatch automatically connects you with ideal matches based on your expertise. So here are some of the features. So you have a public profile page for a host to find and book you as a guest. You have automatic matching with ideal host and podcast. You have message, book, and schedule interviews directly within Podmatch. Another platform is called Podchaser Connect. So basically, the cost, there is a fee, but you have to reach out to Podchaser Connect for details. So Podchaser Connect is a full-service podcast guest placement service. The site uses data-driven matching to sift through their database of over 4 million shows to connect podcasters with the right guests. And so this is you have to understand this is a work in progress, but it is really great. And the features that we love here are custom profiles, data-driven matching. You have a simple placement. You have audience analytics and feedback. And the third site is podcastguest.com. And there's so this site is free. So it's basically, the thing is that the site itself is free, but there is actually a membership. So a podcast membership gets you listed in their directory. You have a custom profile, promotes your show in the site's newsletter, and puts your name in front of thousands of like-minded podcasters looking to connect. And so here are some of the features that we love with this platform. You have a profile featuring information about you and your podcast. You have access to other podcasters looking to connect. You have the ability to send messages to and receive messages from other podcasters. This is just fantastic. So this is really great. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We're having a conversation about how to get booked on podcasts. So now I want to talk to you about method number 3. You want to market yourself as a podcast guest. So method number 1, you want to reach out directly to podcasters. Method number 2, you want to use a third-party platform. Method number 3, you want to do things yourself. So you want to market yourself as a podcast guest. So how do you actually market yourself as a podcast guest? First of all, marketing yourself as a podcast guest makes it clear that you are interested in guest appearances. This is a more passive strategy that can be combined with any of the other outreach methods in today's conversation. So to market yourself as a podcast guest, you can link to a guest request form in social media bio. So you want to put a guest request form as well as your email address. You want to put everything clearly in the bio of all your social media platforms. You can also add this to your social, to your podcast or personal website or your podcast episodes show notes. You want to post a digital ad. Depending on your budget, you could post a Facebook or Instagram ad marketing yourself as an expert in your field actively looking for podcast guest spots. And digital ads allow you to tailor your ads so that you actually appear to those within your target demographic. You can even try content marketing. Oh yeah, this works fantastically. So high quality content marketing is a great way to lay the foundation for getting noticed by podcasters. And if they do a Google search and see your content, they'll be more likely to reach out to you for an interview. But the thing is that content marketing takes time. And because if they have to see your content, that means you are ranking on YouTube. I mean, not YouTube. You are ranking on Google or you're ranking on Bing. And it takes time to rank on Google or YouTube or Bing, right? You need a series of, I mean, I'm not going to go through a course on ranking here, but you need to have a solid SEO strategy that actually revolves around backlinks, very reputable backlinks. And but so those are the 3 ways. If you want to market yourself, those are the 3 ways you can actually market yourself. The bottom line here is that if you do things properly, people will come to you. And this is why I said earlier, this is a more passive strategy in terms of getting booked on podcasts. The other two are more active though. When you reach out to podcasters themselves, you basically are more active, or if you actually hire a third-party platform. What we have seen in our experience, the best way is just to hire a third-party platform. It's more like, you're just outsourcing the whole task to somebody else, so that you're not going to worry about anything else. Somebody else does the work for you. Just pay them every month, $29 a month. That's totally worth it. Totally worth it. Let me give you a few pro tips before we close to this conversation. There are some best practices for being a great podcast guest. So basically, if you are lucky enough to be called onto a platform, onto a show, and a host is willing to give you his or her platform to shine, there are a few ways you can actually make sure that you shine. Okay, have the right equipment for the best audio quality. Use an external mic like the Samsung Q2U instead of the mic in your phone or laptop. You want to get a good pair of headphones to monitor volume levels, and use remote recording software like Zoom, Squadcast, or Riverside FM. So you need to have the right equipment. You want to check your equipment and software also. So before starting the interview, make sure your equipment is fully charged and you have a strong internet connection. Try to stay in the same place throughout the interview so your Wi-Fi signal doesn't change. Okay, it's all about, those are little things you might be thinking, well, those are like technological disruptions really they really wreak havoc. If you are in a serious interview and stuff doesn't work, then you have to really worry about technology instead of worrying about the content of the content you're trying to spread. Okay, you want to minimize possible background noise. You want to pick a recording space like a bedroom or closet with lots of clothes or furniture to dampen the sound. You want to turn off any loud appliances nearby. You want to put your phone on Do Not Disturb. And do your research. You don't want to razzle-dazzle the host. You don't want to do a blah, blah, blah. No, you got to know what you're talking about. Of course, you should be knowledgeable about the topic you'll be discussing, but it's also helpful to listen to a few episodes of the host's podcast to get a feel for the interview and prepare you for the conversation. And also be on time. Give yourself plenty of time to actually do the previous tips so you arrive at the interview prepared and punctual. So once the interview is over, thank the host for having you on, and tell them you will promote the recent episode on your podcast once it's live. And one thing I want to say also is that it's also, you have to think about the opportunity that this host is giving you, but don't let it stop there. If possible, invite this very host to your own podcast. You want to return the favor, right? There's something called karma, and you want to return the favor, and you want to really return the favor in such a way that the host will be also happy to appear on your podcast. And this works fantastically. Let me give you the approach here, the approach you need to follow here. And the approach, I want to also give you a few final thoughts. If you are looking to be a guest on a podcast, you have several options. So reach out to podcast hosts directly, connect via podcast guest placement services, market yourself as a podcast guest and wait for creators to reach out, or do a combination of all three strategies, right? So whichever method you choose, remember that it can take time to get the ball rolling. But once you make a few appearances, you will find more opportunity. You'll find that more opportunities will present themselves, right? The beginning of something is always complicated, but once you have the ball rolling, it becomes easy. And so, do you get paid at all to be a guest on a podcast? It really depends. Podcasts do not usually pay guests to be on their show. The benefit of being a podcast guest comes from exposure. Now, there could be some agreements between the host and yourself if you are going to split revenue, but those will be under some special circumstances. And so basically the question is, do you want to be a guest on a podcast? Well, basically we would say yes, you should be a guest on a podcast. Why? Because being a guest on a podcast acts as social proof that you are knowledgeable, especially you're a knowledgeable person in your field. You are an expert in your field. Podcast guest appearances can also be powerful in terms of marketing for brands looking to promote their products or services in front of a highly engaged target audience. And so to actually get your first guest on a podcast, you can actually go through what I just told you, the three strategies, okay? And you can also search podcast directories like Apple Podcast and Spotify, and you can just reach out to podcast hosts directly. Sometimes you could be like, wow, this is impossible. They'll never get back to me, but you'll be really surprised. You'll be surprised. Some hosts are always on the lookout for new and interesting guests because, see, the thing is, it's a win-win situation for them too. As long as you answer the question, what can you bring to the table? How can you add value to them as well? They'll be really happy to book you because they need guests also to have a show, right? Sometimes, you need guests to have shows, especially if you build your podcast around interviews, you need people to talk to. All right, so here's a recap here. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. So how do you get booked on podcasts? There are three methods. You reach out to podcasters. You use a third-party platform, or you market yourself as a podcast guest. And then I give you a few pro tips, and then I give you the approach you need to follow as well. Thank you. God bless you. I'll speak to you another time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.